We have seen how arts founded on exercise and automatic self-expression develop into music, poetry, and prose. By an indirect approach, they come to represent outer conditions, so they are interwoven in a life which has, in some measure, gone out to meet its opportunities and learned to turn them into an ideal use. We have now to see how man's reactive habits pass simultaneously into art in a wholly different region. Spontaneous expression, such as song, comes when internal growth in an animal system vents itself, as it were, by the way. At the same time, animal economy has playful manifestations concerned with outer things, such as burrowing or collecting objects. These practices are not less spontaneous than the others, and no less expressive, but they seem more external because the traces they leave on the environment are more clearly marked. To change an object is the surest and most glorious way of changing a perception. A shift in posture may relieve the body, and in that way satisfy, but the new attitude is itself unstable. Its pleasantness, like its existence, is transient, and scarcely is a movement executed when both its occasion and its charm are forgotten. Self-expression by exercise, in spite of its pronounced automatism, is therefore something comparatively futile and inglorious. A man has hardly done anything when he has laughed or yawned. Even the inspired poet retains something of this futility. His work is not his, but that of a restless, irresponsible spirit passing through him and hypnotizing him for its own ends. Of the result he has no profit, no glory, and little understanding. So the mystic also positively gloats on his own nothingness, and puts his whole genuine being in a fancied instrumentality and subordination to something else. Far more virile and noble is the sense of having actually done something, and left at least the temporary stamp of one's special will on the world. To chop a stick, to catch a fly, to pile a heap of sand, is a satisfying action. For the sand stays for a while in its novel arrangement, proclaiming to the surrounding level that we have made it our instrument, while the fly will never stir, nor the stick grow together again in all eternity. If the impulse that has thus left its indelible mark on things is constant in our own bosom, the world will have been permanently improved and humanized by our action. Nature cannot but seem more favorable to those ideas which have already found an efficacious champion. Plastic impulses find in this way an immediate sanction in the sense of victory and dominion which they carry with them. It is so evident a proof of power in ourselves to see things and animals bent out of their habitual form and obedient instead to our idea. But a far weightier sanction immediately follows. Man depends on things for his convenience, yet by automatic action he changes these very things so that it becomes possible that by his action he should promote his welfare. He may, of course, no less readily precipitate his ruin. The animal is more subject to vicissitudes than the plant, which makes no effort to escape them or to give chase to what it feeds upon. The greater perils of action, however, are in animals covered partly by fertility, partly by adaptability, partly by success. Sometimes, in modifying the environment, man will improve it, which is merely to say that a change may sometimes fortify the impulse which brought it about. As soon as this retroaction is perceived and the act is done with knowledge of its ensuing benefits, plastic impulses become art, and the world begins actually to change in obedience to reason. The first felt utilities by which plastic instinct is sanctioned are of course not distinctly aesthetic, much less distinctly practical. They are magical. A stone cut into some human or animal semblance fascinates the savage eye much more than would a useful tool or a beautiful idol. The man wonders at his own work and petrifies the miracle of his art into miraculous properties in his product. Primitive art is incredibly conservative, its first creations, having once attracted attention, monopolize it henceforth, and nothing else will be trusted to work the miracle. It is a sign of stupidity in general to stick to physical objects and give them forms apart from their ideal functions, as when a child cries for a broken doll, even if a new and better one is at hand to replace it. Inert associations establish themselves, in such a case, with that part of the thing which is irrelevant to its value, its material substance, or perhaps its name. The idol must be the self-same hereditary stock, or at least it must have the old sanctioned rigidity and stare. Idolatry is by no means incident to art. Art, on the contrary, is a release from idolatry. A cloud, an animal, a spring, a stone, a whole heaven will serve the pure idolater's purpose to perfection. These things have existence and a certain hypnotic power, so that he may make them a focus for his day's contemplation. When the mind takes to generalities, it finds the same fascinations in being or in the absolute, something it needs no art to discover. The more indeterminate, immediate, and unutterable the idol is, the better it induces panic, self-contradiction, and a reduction of all discourse to the infinite intensity of zero. When idolaters pass from trying to evoke the absolutely existent to apostrophizing the sun or an hyphalic bull, they have made an immense progress in art and religion. For now, their idols represent some specific and beneficent function in nature, something propitious to ideal life and to its determinate expression. Isaiah is very scornful of idols made with hands because they have no physical energy. He forgets that perhaps they represent something, and so have a spiritual dignity which things living and powerful never have, unless they too become representative and express some ideal. The question merely is whether the sculptor's image or the prophet's stand for their greatest interest and is a more adequate symbol for the good. The noblest art will be the one, whether plastic or literary or dialectical, which creates figments more truly representative of what is momentous in human life. Similarly, the least idolatrous religion will be the one which used the most perfect art and most successfully abstracted the good from the real. Conservatism rules in those manufactures which are tributary to architecture and the smaller plastic arts. Utility makes small headway against custom, not only when custom has become a religion, but even when it remains inert and without mythical sanction. To admit or trust anything new is to overcome the inertia which is a general law in the brain no less than elsewhere, and which may be distinguished in reflection into a technical and social conservatism. Technical conservatism appears, for instance, in a man's handwriting, which is so seldom improved, even when admitted, perhaps, to be execrable. Every artist has his tricks of execution. Every school its hereditary, irrational processes. These refractory habits are to blame for the rare and often ignored quality of genius. They limit excellence to one style and deny it to all others. The same principle goes deeper. Conception and imagination are themselves automatic and running grooves, so that only certain forms of certain combinations will ever suggest themselves to a given designer. Every writer's style, too, however varied within limits, is single and monotonous compared with the ideal possibilities of expression. Genius at every moment is confined to the idiom it is creating. Social inertia is due to the same causes, working in the community at large. The fancy, for instance, of building churches in the shape of a cross has largely determined Christian architecture. Builders were prevented by a foregone conclusion in themselves and by their patrons' demands from conceiving any alternative to that convention. Early pottery, they say, imitates wickerwork, and painted landscape was for ages not allowed to exist without figures although even the old masters show plainly enough in their backgrounds that they could love landscape for its own sake. When one link with humanity has been rendered explicit and familiar, people assume that by no other means can humanity be touched at all, even if at the same time their own heart is expanding to the highest raptures in a quite different region. The severer Greeks reprobated music without words. St. Augustine complained of chants that rendered the sacred text unintelligible. The Puritans regarded elaborate music as diabolical, little knowing how soon some of their descendants would find religion in nothing else. A stupid convention still looks on material and mathematical processes as somehow distressing and ugly, and systems of philosophy, artificially mechanical, are invented to try to explain natural mechanism away, whereas in no region can the spirit feel so much at home as among natural causes, or realize so well its universal affinities, or so safely enlarge its happiness. Automatism is a source of beauty. It is not necessary to look so high as the stars to perceive this truth. The action of an animal's limbs or the movement of a waterfall will prove it to any one who has eyes and can shake himself loose from verbal prejudices, those debris of old perceptions which choke all fresh perception in the soul. Irrational hopes, irrational shames, irrational decencies make man's chief desolation. A slight knocking of fools' heads together might be enough to break up the ossifications there and start the blood coursing again through possible channels. Art has an infinite range. Nothing shifts so easily as taste, and yet nothing so often misses the direction in which it might find most satisfaction. Since construction grows rational, slowly, and by indirect pressure, we may expect that its most superficial merits will be the first appreciated. Of all grounds for admiration, those most readily seized are size, elaboration, splendor of materials, and difficulties or costs involved. Having built or dug in the conventional way, a man may hang before his door some trophy of battle or the chase, bearing witness to his prowess, just as people now, not thinking of making their rooms beautiful, fill them with photographs of friends or places they have known, to suggest and re-burnish in their minds their interesting personal history, which even they, unstimulated, might tend to forget. That dwelling will seem best adorned which contains most adventitious objects. Bare and ugly will be whatever is not concealed by something else. Again, a barbarous architect, without changing his model, may build in a more precious material, and his work will be admired for the evidence it furnishes of wealth and willfulness. As a community grows luxurious and becomes accustomed to such display, it may come to seem strange and hideous to see a wooden plate or a pewter spoon. A beautiful house will need to be in marble, and the sight of a plebeian brick will banish all satisfaction. Less irrational, and therefore less vulgar, is the wonder aroused by great bulk or difficulty in the work. Exertions to produce a great result, even if it be material, must be allied to perseverance and intelligent direction. Roman bridges and aqueducts, for instance, gain a profound emotional power when we see in their monotonous arches a symbol of the mightiest enterprise in history, and their decay an evidence of its failure. Curiosity is satisfied, historic imagination is stimulated, tragic reflection is called forth. We cannot refuse admiration to a work so full of mind, even if no great plastic beauty happens to distinguish it. It is at any rate beautiful enough, like the sea or the skeleton of a mountain. We may rely on the life it has made possible to have more positive charms and clothe it with imaginative functions. Modern engineering works often have a similar value. The force and intelligence they express merge in aesthetic sense, and the place they hold in a portentous civilization blends them in almost epic dignity. New York, since it took to doing business in towers, has become interesting to look at from the sea, nor is it possible to walk through the overshadowed streets without feeling a pleasing wonder. A city, when enough people swarm in it, is as fascinating as an anthill, and its buildings, whatever other charms they may have, are at least as curious and delightful as seashells or birds' nests. The purpose of improvements in modern structures may be economic, just as the purpose of castles was military, but both may incidentally please the contemplative mind in their bold forms and human associations. An artist may be kept true to his style, either by ignorance of all others or by love of his own. This fidelity is a condition of progress. Every necessary structure has a specific character and its essential associations. Taking his cue from these, an artist may experiment freely. He may emphasize the structure in the classic manner and turn its lines into ornament, adding only what may help to complete and unite its suggestions. This Puritanism in design is rightly commended, but its opposite may be admirable too. We may admit that nudity is the right garment for the gods, but it would hardly serve the interests of beauty to legislate that all mortals should always go naked. The veil that conceals natural imperfections may have a perfection of its own. Maxims in art are pernicious. Beauty is here the only commandment, and beauty is a free natural gift. When it has appeared, we may perceive that its influence is rational, since it both expresses and fosters a harmony of impressions and impulses in the soul. But to take any mechanism whatever, and merely because it is actual or necessary, to insist that it is worth exhibiting, and that by divine decree it shall be pronounced beautiful, is to be quite at sea in moral philosophy. To love decoration is to enjoy synthesis. In other words, it is to have hungry senses and unused powers of attention. This hunger, when it cannot well be fed by recollecting things past, relishes a profusion of things simultaneous. Nothing is so much respected by unintelligent people as elaboration and complexity. They are simply dazed and overawed at seeing at once so much more than they can master. To overwhelm the senses is, for them, the only way of filling the mind. It takes cultivation to appreciate in art, as in philosophy, the consummate value of what is simple and finite, because it has found its pure function and ultimate import in the world. What is just, what is delicately and silently adjusted to its special office, and thereby, in truth, to all ultimate issues, seems to the vulgar something obvious and poor. That the ornate may be very beautiful, that in fact, what is to be completely beautiful needs to be somehow rich, is a fact of experience. Decoration, by stimulating the senses, not only brings a primary satisfaction with it, independent of any that may supervene, but it furnishes an element of effect which no higher beauty can ever render unwelcome or inappropriate, since any higher beauty in moving the mind must give it a certain sensuous and emotional coloring. Decoration is accordingly an independent art, to be practiced for its own sake, in obedience to elementary plastic instincts. It is fundamental in design, for everything structural or significant produces in the first instance some sensuous impression and figures as a spot or pattern in the field of vision. The fortunate architect is he who has, for structural skeleton in his work, a form in itself decorative and beautiful, who can carry it out in a beautiful material, and who finally is suffered to add so much decoration as the eye may take in with pleasure, without losing the expression and lucidity of the whole. The Greek temple, for instance, if we imagine it in its glory, with all its color and furniture, was a type of human art at its best, where decoration, without in the least restricting itself, took naturally and exquisitely subordinate and pervasive form. Each detail had its own splendor and refinement, yet kept its place in the whole. In some ways, the ideal Gothic church attained a similar perfection, because there too the structure remained lucid and predominant, while it was enriched by many necessary appointments, altars, stalls, screens, chantries, and tombs, which, while really the raison d'etre of the whole edifice, aesthetically regarded, served for its ornaments. It may be doubted, however, whether Gothic construction was well grounded enough in utility to be a sound and permanent basis for traditional art, and the extreme instability of Gothic style, the feverish inconstancy of architects straining after effects never, apparently, satisfactory when achieved, shows that something was vain and artificial in the circumstances. The structure, in becoming an ornament, ceased to be anything else, and could be discarded by anyone whose fancy preferred a different image. For this reason, a building like the Cathedral of Amiens, where a structural system is put through consistently, is far from representing medieval art in its full and ideal essence. It is rather an incidental achievement, a sport in which an adventitious interest is, for a moment, emphasized overwhelmingly. Intelligence here comes to the fore, and a sort of mathematical virtuosity. But it was not mathematical virtuosity, or even intelligence to which, in Christian art, the leading role properly belonged. What structural elucidation did for church architecture was much like what scholastic elucidation did for church dogma. It insinuated logic into the traditional edifice, which was far from representing its soul or its genuine value. To vault at such heights and to prop that vault with external buttresses was a gratuitous undertaking. The result was indeed interesting. The ingenuity and method exhibited were masterly in their way, yet the result was not proportionate in beauty to the effort required. The true magic of that very architecture lay not in its intelligible structure, but in the bewildering incidental effects which that structure permitted. The part in such churches is better than the symmetrical whole. Often incompleteness and accretions alone give grace or expression to the monument. A cross vista where all is wonder, a side chapel where all is peace, strike the keynote here. Not that punctilious and wooden repetition of props and arches as a builder's model might boast to exhibit them. Perhaps the most beautiful Gothic interiors are those without aisles, if what we are considering is their proportion and majesty. Elsewhere the structure, if perceived at all, is too artificial and strange to be perceived intuitively and to have the glow of a genuine beauty. There is an over-ingenuous mechanism, redeemed by its color and the thousand intervening objects, when these have not been swept away. Glazed and painted as Gothic churches were meant to be, they were no doubt exceedingly gorgeous. When we admire their structural scheme, we are perhaps nursing an illusion like that which sentimental classicists once cherished when they talked about the purity of the white marble statues and the ideality of their blank and sightless eyes. What we treat as a supreme quality may have been a mere means to medieval builders and a mechanical expedient. Their simple hearts were set on making their churches, for God's glory and their own, as large, as high, and as rich as possible. After all, an uninterrupted tradition attached them to Byzantium, and it was the sudden passion for stained glass and the goldsmith's love of intricate fineness, which the Saracens also had shown, that carried them in a century from Romanesque to flamboyant. The structure was but the inevitable underpinning of the desired display. If these sanctuaries, in their spoliation and ruin, now show us their admirable bones, we should thank nature for that rational skeleton, imposed by material conditions, on an art which in its lifetime was goaded on only by pious and local emulation, and wished at all costs to be sumptuous and astonishing. To the architect, sculpture and painting are only means of variegating a surface. Light and shade, depth and elaboration are thereby secured and aid him in distributing his masses. For this reason, geometrical or highly conventionalized ornament is all the architect requires. if its decorations furnish more, if they insist on copying natural forms or illustrating history, that is their own affair. Humanity will doubtless give them, as representative artists, a new claim on human regard, and the building they enrich in their pictorial fashion will gain a new charm, just as it would gain by historic associations or by the smell of incense clinging to its walls. When the arts superpose their effect, the total impression belongs to none of them in particular. It is imaginative merely, or, in the broadest sense, poetical. So the monumental function of Greek sculpture and the interpretations it gave to national myths made every temple a storehouse of poetic memories. In the same way, every great cathedral became a pious storybook. Construction, by omitting applied decoration, offers a splendid basis and background for representative art. It is in their decorative function that construction and representation meet. They are able to conspire in one ideal effect by virtue of the common appeal which they unwittingly make to the senses. If construction were not decorative, it could not ally itself imaginatively to decoration, and decoration, in turn, would ever be willingly representative if the forms which illustration requires were not decorative in themselves.